Welcome back, class. If you're watching this video, then I'm assuming you've watched the video entitled, If the United States Were 100 People. If you haven't watched that video, then I'd recommend stopping this lesson and return to that video at this time. So let's talk about the video. As you can see, the United States is a diverse country, and all data points to the U.S. becoming more diverse in the future. According to the Pew Research Center, we will see major changes in the ethnicity of the U.S. between now and 2050. Whites will decrease from 67 to 47%. The Latino population will increase from 14 to 29%. African Americans will remain constant at 13%. And Asian Americans will increase from 5 to 9%. Other ethnicities, such as Native Americans and Arab Americans, will add more diversity to our population. I've already mentioned that struggling students judge those who are different as inappropriate, lacking, wrong, or bad. Therefore, if we want to be successful students and members of society and move towards interdependence, we need to discuss ways we can achieve success in a world of increasing diversity. So, let's begin by discussing ways you can make a conscious effort to show respect to someone in a culture different from your own. The first way we can show respect to someone who is culturally different from us is to learn to pronounce names correctly. Whether we realize it or not, our names are something we hold sacred. Not only does it identify who we are, but it also gives us a sense of individuality. Therefore, when you meet someone with an unfamiliar name, simply say, "I want to be sure I'm pronouncing your name correctly. Would you please say it for me?" Such an act will show the person you care enough to see them as an individual and that you want to respond to them in a friendly manner. Secondly, try to use the preferred term for a person's cultural group. For example, Latino and Latina are often the preferred terms for this group. However, many choose to use the term Hispanic. Some Latinos and Latinas believe this term was thrust on them by the U.S. Census Bureau. Therefore, they feel as if they've lost their identity by being incorrectly categorized. Therefore, when you refer to a person's cultural group, try to use the preferred term. If you're unsure of the culture's preferred term, just ask. After all, many people are more forgiving of you as a person if you say you're trying to learn the correct term, instead of using the incorrect term again and again. Next, learn the nonverbal behaviors of the other culture. Why is this important? Whether we realize it or not, 90% of the messages we send are nonverbal. So what do we mean when we say nonverbal? Simply put, we're referring to the gestures, the space between us as we talk, and eye contact. In other words, it's the things we do with our body that is often unconscious, but may be offensive to other people from other cultures. For example, the simple gesture of a two-handed handshake in North America may seem warm and pleasant. However, such a gesture may be offensive to someone from Saudi Arabia, because in the Saudi culture, the left hand is considered unclean. Or think about this. In North America, it's common for us to have a 3 to 4 foot gap between us as we talk. However, for some cultures, a closer distance is the norm. Therefore, if you move away from someone as they're talking, they might find that your distancing actions are offensive. Finally, in North America, it's considered normal to look someone in the eye as you talk to them. However, in some cultures, such as Korea and Japan, eye contact is considered rude and disrespectful. Therefore, when you're learning to communicate with someone from a different culture, be mindful of your nonverbal language and think about your gestures, spacing, and eye contact. Another way we can show respect to others is to see people as individuals and not as stereotypes. A stereotype is a generalization about a group of people based on limited or even faulty evidence. Unfortunately, once we believe the stereotype is true, we tend to apply it to all individuals of a particular group. However, stereotypes are disrespectful to individuals of a group because they don't account for the uniqueness of each person. Therefore, when you meet someone new, don't assume you know everything about them due to some faulty generalizations. Get to know them as a person. Yet another way we can show respect to others is to avoid ethnocentrism or the right versus wrong game. Many times, we believe that the way we do things is better than the way they do things. So we're convinced that our way is the right and the only way to do things. If we truly want to show respect to others, we need to learn to be more open to others' perspectives. We can also show respect for others by avoiding microaggressions. Microaggressions are brief slights and insults that send demeaning messages to members of minority groups. For example, let's say a female student is in a math study group with 3 other males. However, when the group gets together, the female is avoided and not asked to participate in the discussion of solving a problem. The microaggression in the scenario is that the males assume she cannot solve the problem because she's a female. Therefore, the males, whether they realize it or not, have acted out based on a stereotype. So as you work to show respect towards others, be mindful of those subtle slights that may be based on a stereotype. The final way we can show respect to others is to advocate for respect. Often, oppression comes in many shapes and forms. It may appear as a joke about someone who is different, or it may be as bold as a slur or comment directed at someone due to their race, religion, or even sexual orientation. When you witness such an offense, be a voice for those who cannot defend themselves against discrimination. After all, if you remain silent, your silence may be interpreted as agreement with the prejudiced views. Another way we can strengthen relationships with others is to communicate in a style that outlines our goals and dreams. Sadly, we will all probably face someone along our path who either doesn't want to see us achieve our goals and dreams, or we may come across people who are too busy, too preoccupied, or couldn't care less about helping us. Therefore, how we communicate our desires to these types of people can affect our success. However, before we can learn how to effectively communicate, we need to look at 2 forms of ineffective communication employed by victims. According to family therapist and psychologist Virginia Sater, the 2 most common patterns of ineffective communication are placating and blaming. Victims who placate are dominated by their inner critic. They place themselves below others by saying whatever they think will gain approval. Therefore, they often exhibit characteristics of a codependent personality. Here are a few examples of what we sound like when we placate. It's okay if you don't help me with our project in sociology. I'll just do the work by myself. Please don't be upset with me. I'll drive your friends to the airport and study for my math test later. I'm sorry. I should have cleaned up the mess from our party last night. I'll do it right now. Have you ever said anything like this? If so, you were placating or placing yourself below someone else to gain their approval. However, by communicating in such a way, you probably spent a lot of time in quadrant 3, completing actions that were not important to you, but were urgent to the person whose approval you were trying to gain. On the other hand, victims who blame are dominated by their inner defender. They place themselves above others and make others fully responsible for their problems. Have you ever said anything like this? You never do anything to help our study team. You're just lazy. This room is a mess. When do you plan to start doing your share of the work around here? My sociology instructor gives unfair tests. He thinks he can ask questions about anything that we were supposed to read for homework. If you've made these statements, then you're guilty of holding others responsible for problems. However, don't feel bad. According to Virginia Sater, about 30% of people use blaming as their major communication style. When we placate or blame, we hinder our ability to develop supportive relationships, and we move further and further away from accomplishing our goals and dreams. Therefore, placating and blaming also affects our self-esteem, or the relationship we have with ourselves, in that we slip into a cycle of stagnation instead of a cycle of success. So if we want to communicate effectively and avoid the placating or blaming, we need to adopt the communication style of creators. That communication style is called leveling. When we level, we are assertive and honestly express our opinions and requests. Simply put, leveling is characterized by one profound strategy. We assert the truth as we see it. As creators, we boldly express our personal truths without false apology or the excuses of those who placate, and without the harsh criticism that comes from blaming. However, leveling requires a strong inner guide and a commitment to honesty to be successful. So, let's look at 3 strategies that can promote leveling. The first strategy is to communicate purposefully. Even in times when we're emotional, when we level, we speak with a clear purpose. We don't allow our emotions to drag us off topic. We stick to the topic at hand and do not let emotional outbursts dictate the conversation. Furthermore, we know that what we hope to accomplish through communication, and we can verify that the message was received by examining the results of our conversation. The second strategy to promote leveling is to communicate honestly. Unlike the placater who allows everyone to walk over him or her, creators candidly express unpopular thoughts and feelings. Therefore, when a creator is angry, he or she says so. You never have to wonder how a creator feels. He or she tells you so there is no ambiguity in the message. The final strategy to promote leveling is to communicate responsibly. Because responsibility lies within, creators express their personal responsibility with I messages. An I message allows creators to take full responsibility for their reaction to anything another person may have said or done. Therefore, an effective I message has 4 elements. First, first is a statement of the situation, such as, when you do. The second part of an I message is a statement of a reaction, which tells how the creator feels by using such words as I felt, or I thought, or I decided. The I message then follows with a request such as, therefore, I'd like to ask that you. Finally, the I message provides the receiver with an invitation to respond, such as, will you agree to that? Now that you know what effective communication looks like, let's look at a few examples of leveling. I know you've got a lot of work to do tonight. Could we spend just 10 minutes cleaning up the mess together? Before I can help you with your paper, I need to finish studying for a test. How about if you help me review tonight? I'll work with you on your paper tomorrow afternoon. Do you see the differences? Placators are unclear in their messages. Blamers pawn their problems off on someone else and do not take responsibility for the situation. However, creators who level communicate honestly and responsibly and have a purpose behind their communication. A creator seeks definite yes or no answers. Victims often accept a maybe or an I'll try for fear of getting a no, even when hearing a specific no would be better. In other words, when we communicate as creators, we use leveling to achieve results. That concludes all of the information for this lesson. See you next time.